A horrific and gruesome multiple homicide that took place a week ago has rocked Armenia. 6 members of the Avetisyan family were found shot dead in their home in the country's second largest city, Gyumri. On January 12 at approximately noon, police in Gyumri received an emergency call that a family had been murdered in their home while they were sleeping. According to different accounts, at approximately 6:20 a.m., neighbors heard something like an explosion or gunfire. They thought it could have been an earthquake. Later in the morning at about 10 a.m., a relative of the family discovers the horrific scene. Except for the infant, everyone is dead. The victims, Seryozha Avetisyan, Hasmik Avetisyan, Armen Avetisyan, Araksya Avetisyan, Aida Avetisyan, and 2-year-old Hasmik Avetisyan. And on January 19, after struggling for 7 days to stay alive, 6-month-old Seryozha Avetisyan succumbed to his injuries and passed away. As local and state police rush to the scene, all roads leading out of Gyumri are blocked off as a nationwide manhunt ensued for the killer. The main suspect in the shootings? Russian soldier Valery Permyakov. Investigators dispatched to the crime scene find Russian military fatigues, an AK-74 shells, unused magazines, and army boots bearing the name Permyakov. As the news of the murder spreads across the country, horror and shock are replaced by outrage. President Seryozha Avetisyan calls a special consultation with different law enforcement bodies to determine the details and find the guilty party. The president's office says that the military command of the Russian base is cooperating with Armenian law enforcement and providing practical support in the investigation. The same day, the Russian embassy in Armenia issues a statement, also expressing shock and offering all of its resources in the ongoing investigation. The statement says, "We are shocked by this terrible crime. We mourn with the Armenian people. The perpetrators of this vicious crime should be given the most severe punishment." Also on January 12, Armenia's Defense Minister Seyran Ohanyan has a telephone conversation with his Russian counterpart Sergei Shoigu about the tragedy. In the late hours of January 12, near midnight, Permyakov is apprehended, trying to cross the Armenia-Turkey border near the village of Bayandur. He is wearing civilian clothes. According to the district prosecutor, Permyakov was caught by Russian military personnel who are now also involved in the search for the suspected criminal. Many might ask, what was the Russian soldier doing roaming the streets of Gyumri armed with an AK-47? The 102nd Russian military base is located in Gyumri. Approximately 3,000 to 4,000 Russian soldiers are stationed there. The purpose of its existence is to protect and man Armenia's border with Turkey and Iran. Following the 1994 Russian-brokered ceasefire, which brought the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict to a tenuous end, a Russian base was established a year later in 1995. Turkey, in solidarity with Azerbaijan, had closed the border with Armenia in 1993 during the height of the Karabakh War. According to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Shoigu, Russian military bases are there to ensure the security of the CIS countries. The 1995 Armenian-Russian Treaty for the base stipulated the Russian presence on Armenian soil until 2020, but back in 2010, when then-President Dmitry Medvedev arrived in Yerevan, he signed an agreement to extend the lease term until 2044. A day after the murders on January 13, Defense Minister Seyran Ohanyan goes to Gyumri to oversee the investigation. And an investigation team from Moscow, including Deputy Defense Minister Arkady Bakhin, is also deployed to assist Armenian security forces. But it still remains to be seen whether Permyakov, the key suspect in the horrific murders, will be tried in Armenia or in Russia. Following his consultation, Seyran Ohanyan makes no specific comments. After being caught, Permyakov admits to the murder, although his motives still remain unclear. This is what we know. He deserted his military post at the Russian base armed with an AK-47 and 2 loaded magazines. At approximately 4 a.m., Permyakov told investigators that he walked around the city and randomly entered the Avetisyan residence, located about 3 kilometers from his base. He said that all he wanted was a glass of water. Permyakov had been deployed at the base for just over a month. Armenia's Prosecutor General on January 13 says that the Russian side will maintain custody of the Russian soldier until at least the end of the criminal investigation. In a written statement, the Prosecutor General refers to an article of the Russian Constitution that prohibits the extradition of Russian citizens to foreign states, alluding that Permyakov would not be handed over to the Armenian side to stand trial for the murders. The 1995 Armenia-Russian Treaty that regulates the Russian military presence clearly states that any crime committed outside the base by Russian military personnel will be subjected to Armenian security forces and Armenian law. However, since Permyakov was allegedly caught by the Russians and taken to the Russian military base, which is considered Russian territory, the Russians do not need to hand him over. And this is exactly what Armenia's prosecutor had just confirmed. This statement causes an uproar across the country. Later, however, the prosecutor backtracks and insists that the trial of Permyakov will take place on Armenian territory. However, he falls short of saying whether Permyakov would remain in Russian military custody. While legal arguments are being made as to whose jurisdiction Permyakov should be under, which side should be conducting the investigation, and where he should stand trial, the 6 members of the Avetisyan family were brought to St. Nishan Armenian Apostolic Church in Gyumri on January 14 for requiem services. Thousands of people came to the church where 6 coffins were lined up by the altar. 2-year-old Hasmik's coffin resembling a cradle. It is white and full of colorful toys. That same day, more than 1,000 people take part in a car rally through the city and eventually make their way to the Russian military base where they are confronted by heavy security presence. The protesters are demanding that Permyakov be handed over to Armenian law enforcement bodies. They issue an ultimatum. Permyakov must be handed over to the Armenian side by the following day, January 15 at 5 p.m. January 15, a few hours before the funeral for the slain members of the Avetisyan family, Armenian Prosecutor General Kevor Kostanyan holds a press conference in Gyumri, where his conflicting statements leave journalists unable to comprehend exactly what he's saying. He's not clear on whether Permyakov would be handed over to the Armenian side or whether he would serve his sentence in Russia or in Armenia. He says it is too soon to say, and besides, it is not a huge issue of principle. He talks about international legal regulations, the existence of the bilateral treaty regulating the Russian base, says that Armenian law cannot be exclusively applied. He insists and repeats that the accused will be tried on Armenian territory. His statements leave many wondering about the sincerity of his words. What did he mean by Armenian territory? The Russian military command has a Russian military court in Yerevan after all. And by stressing Armenian territory, was he referring to the Russian military court, which is indeed on Armenian territory. Meanwhile, in Yerevan, protests take place in front of the presidential palace and the Russian embassy by concerned citizens, demanding that Permyakov be transferred to the Armenian side to stand trial in an Armenian court and according to Armenian legislation. Also on January 15, the Deputy Commander, Colonel Alexei Payluchovich of the Russian military base holds a press conference. He says, quote, "The military command and staff of the base are shocked by the terrible tragedy." He extends his condolences to the family and the Armenian people and says that people who commit such crimes do not have a nationality. Thousands of people attend the funeral mass for the slain victims. It seems as if all of Gyumri has come to bid farewell. Aside from a few officials, the glaring absence of the country's leadership is apparent to all. A national day of mourning has not been arranged, either by the president of the country, the region, or the city. There is growing anger and demands that the government call for a day of mourning, but to date, no such announcement has been made. The people of Armenia grieve on their own. Immediately following the funeral, protesters gather at the Shirak Mars District Prosecutor's Office at 5 p.m., the deadline of the ultimatum they had issued a day earlier, demanding Permyakov's handing over to Armenian law enforcement bodies. Kevor Kostanyan comes out to talk with the protesters. He tells them that Armenian investigators are at the Russian military base interrogating the accused. Levon Barsegyan of the Asparez Club NGO demands to know if the Russian military court in Yerevan means Armenian territory by Kostanyan. Unable to contain the anger of the crowd, Kostanyan retreats into the building. Protesters throw stones and coins after him, calling him a sellout. Members of Parliament Zari Postanjan and Mardun Grigoryan stand with the protesters, demanding that the prosecutor answer their questions. At approximately 6:30 p.m., the prelate of Shirak Mars, Mikhail Ajabayan, comes and states, "We must demand from the Russian Federation that they hand over the criminal to us. We are standing here on both sides as Armenians, but in reality, we need to present our demand in a civilized manner to the Russian military base and to Russia." Kostanyan makes another reappearance in a bid to quell the growing anger of the protesters. He promises that he will write a letter to the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation with the demand to hand over Permyakov to the Republic of Armenia. He besieges the demonstrators. He tells them that he too is a father, an Armenian, and he won't let that, quote, scoundrel get away with anything. It becomes painfully clear that he has lost control of the situation. The protesters have broken him. Some in the crowd who are not appeased decide to go to the Russian consulate. As they march on the consulate, they are met with a heavy police presence. Clashes and skirmishes break out, resulting in over a dozen injuries, including police officers. Dozens more are arrested and taken away. It is only after Member of Parliament Mardun Grigoryan asks protesters to leave the consulate and go to the district prosecutor's office. He promises to arrange that two people go to the Russian military base to ensure Permyakov is indeed still in Armenia. Meanwhile, in Yerevan, several dozen people gather at Liberty Square to show their support and solidarity with the people of Gyumri. Large number of plainclothes police ascend on the crowd. They are later joined by uniformed police. Several of those present are detained. In the meantime, in Gyumri, late at night, Member of Parliament Mardun Grigoryan of Prosperous Armenia Party and one of the demonstrators, Garen Bedrosyan, have been to the Russian military base and confirmed that Valery Permyakov is there. He was there, we saw him with our own eyes, Grigoryan said. The following day, January 16, calm has descended on Gyumri. All those who were arrested have been released by police. The mayor of Gyumri, Samvel Balasanyan, holds a press conference. He tells reporters that he was in Glendale, signing an agreement to have Gyumri and Glendale become sister cities. He says he couldn't announce a day of mourning. The law doesn't permit a mayor to do that. He says that a delegation might go and visit little Seryozha Avetisyan in hospital in Yerevan, that he might go if he has the time. He says, a criminal doesn't have a religion, doesn't have a nationality. We should not say Russian or Armenian. A Georgian could have committed this crime. We should not place Armenian-Russian relations on this table. And indeed, Balasanyan was merely reiterating the sentiment that several government officials and government-run television stations had been stressing. Let's not strain our brotherly relations with Russia. They all took the time to make these statements, but couldn't find the time to go to Gyumri, to pay their respects, to mourn alongside their people, announce a day of national mourning. 4 days after the horrific murder, the Catholicos of all Armenians, His Holiness Karakin II, issued a statement regarding the murders in Gyumri, expressing pain and sorrow and appealing for calm. Armenia's Human Rights Ombudsman Karen Andreasyan also issued a statement on January 16, stating that the murder case in Gyumri must be heard by Armenia's legal and justice system and that the accused must be handed over to the Armenian side by a written demand by the Prosecutor General of Armenia. The Ombudsman goes on to say that according to the Armenian-Russian bilateral treaty, Armenia's constitution and legislation, the case of the murders in Gyumri must be investigated and heard by the Republic of Armenia's legal and justice system. The suspect must be handed over to the Armenian side through the written request of the Prosecutor General. On January 18, 6 days after the murders in Gyumri, Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed his condolences to the relatives of the victims and to the Armenian people. He stated that he was confident that all necessary steps in the investigation would be implemented and the guilty parties brought to justice. He also offered to medevac Seryozha Avetisyan to Moscow if necessary for further treatment. What remains today, a week after the murder, is a host of unanswered questions surrounding this tragedy. When it was discovered that Valery Permyakov had deserted his post while armed, did the Russian side inform corresponding Armenian authorities in an appropriate time frame? Why did it take so long for the police to go to the crime scene? Why were they informed by emergency services only at noon, when the crime took place at approximately 6 in the morning of January 12th? What is the motive behind this crime? What caused the Russian soldier to desert his post, end up 3 kilometers from his base, and aimlessly wander in the streets of Gyumri and walk into a random home? Why did Permyakov leave behind his military fatigues and rifle? If Permyakov was found to be mentally imbalanced, as claimed by Armenian Deputy Police Chief, then how was Permyakov able to plan an escape through the Armenia-Turkey border? If the Russian constitution says that its citizens cannot be extradited to a foreign country, and if the Russian side has already charged him with desertion and murder, why are Armenian authorities insisting that the accused will be transferred to the Armenian side? Why were the Russians involved in the search for his capture? Did the Armenian side not know that if caught by the Russians, he would be kept in their custody? And what about the rumors circulating that he was indeed caught by the Armenians but handed over to the Russians? These are questions that require answers, and it is the responsibility of the government to find the person responsible for eradicating 3 generations of the Avetisyan family and make sure that they face justice.